Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Containment Bay Z1T9 Extreme, where we face off against Zurvan. You'll find that this encounter is fairly simple as long as you remain observant of each mechanic. But there's no time to talk about that now. Get in Zurvan and I'll explain on the way. My name is Ms. Tech and I'll be your primal guide. Zurvan has a cleave and tanks should keep him faced away from the raid group at all times. In this first section, you'll notice quadrants of the platform fall at set intervals counterclockwise. Make sure you're not standing in any of these areas and rotate as necessary. Flare Star will place a number of AoE circles on random players and you'll need to move out of these as necessary. Since the platform is continuously getting smaller, I'd recommend that you stack until Flare Star casts to bait where the AoEs are dropped, giving you the space you'll need to dodge. Eventually, Zurvan will be released from containment and you will all fall down into the main arena. This area has a ring of fire around it that will do damage to anyone standing in it. Avoid this as necessary. Up next, Zurvan will cast Soar, a dive bomb mechanic with a twist. Soar begins with one of two possible telegraph patterns that can help you predict what the actual dive bomb pattern will be. You'll see either this evenly spaced 3-point pattern or this squished center pattern. To break it down, each initial Soar telegraph shows where the boss will end up around the outer rim. From each of these 3 points, the boss will then dive bomb across the arena in a straight line, dealing damage and placing vulnerability stacks on players hit. At the same time, 6 players will be affected by Flaming Halberd, these large targeted AoE circles that do damage and place a fire resist down debuff on affected players. These Flaming Halberd AoEs must be spread apart to avoid overlap. Since you're trying to dodge the Soar dive bombs at the same time, players will need to spread around the room depending on what dive bomb pattern they are dodging. For example, in the squish center pattern, the dive bombs dissect through most of the center, giving you a section in the relative north and relative south to spread out in. In the star pattern, each player will have their own slice of safe zone in between each dive bomb. To quickly and easily position for each pattern, I would highly recommend assigning safe zones for each player. That way, everyone knows exactly where to run based on the Soar pattern and no overlap should ever occur. Immediately after the dive bombs and AoE circles go off, one player will be marked for demonic dive with the stack up marker. Another player will be marked for a single target blast. All players except this one will need to stack together to share the damage of demonic dive. We stack in the center while the solo marked player stands off to the side. This first Soar in phase 2 can and probably will be skipped by most groups with average raid damage. If you push the boss to 75% quickly after the drop, you won't have to worry about this set of mechanics at all. Instead, he'll move right into the next set, which begins with the area inside his hitbox turning into ice. This deals damage and debuffs you, essentially keeping you from being able to move through him during this time. The main tank will see 3 more cleaves, and then the boss casts Biting Halberd. He will turn to face a random direction and begin a cast that will deal damage in a massive cone. The only way to dodge this is to stand directly behind him. As soon as he turns and begins to cast, all players must move around until they are directly behind. Immediately after, he'll cast Southern Cross, which will place an AoE ice puddle on each player. This ice will place a dot, a heavy, and add stacking vulnerability debuffs to anyone inside. Players will remain stacked to bait these neatly together before moving around the boss to dodge. We have the main tank dodge one way while the rest of the raid dodges the other way to avoid the next cleave. Next up, one of 3 possible AoE attack mechanics can happen. If he casts Biting Halberd again, be sure to stand directly behind him. If he casts Cyclical, make sure you're in melee range to avoid the AoE blast. If he casts Tail End, all players need to move to the outer edge of the arena to dodge. Keep an eye on his cast bar to see what's coming and then move appropriately. Eventually, Zurvan disappears and will spawn a number of adds. In the first wave, 4 Thews and 1 Will spawn in the north. Tanks will grab all of these and group them up while everyone else burns them down. The Thews don't do much of significance, but there are a lot of them. The Wills gain damage up buffs every 10 seconds and slam the tanks with hard thrust, which is a guaranteed crit. Tanks and healers will need to be ready with cooldowns as necessary. The second wave spawns 2 Wills in the west, 1 Wile in the south, and 1 Wit in the east. This is a great time to use awareness tanks, especially if you're single tanking, since damage will be pretty high with 2 Wills up. The Wit will begin to cast Meteor and should be destroyed before this cast goes off. The Wile will cast Fear, and all players need to ensure they're not facing him at this time or they'll be feared. Players will also need to dodge the AoE circles as necessary. The last phase spawns a Will in the south, 3 Thews in the east, 1 Wile in the north, and a Wit in the west. Same as before, have the tank pick up the Will and the Thews while everyone else burns down the Wit and turns away from the Wile during its Fear cast. Dodge AoE and stack up the adds to burn them down. Zurvan will then cast his ultimate, and the last phase will begin. All players will be tethered in 2 pairs of infinite ice or infinite fire. These tethered pairs must stay close by, or they will suffer infinite anguish, high dot damage for as long as they are apart. The maximum safe distance to avoid damage is roughly the diameter of the boss's hitbox. Wave Cannon will target a random player with this blue marker and will blast them for damage and apply a bleed debuff. This player will need to move away from the group to avoid excess stacking of bleed debuffs on everyone. We have an assigned flank for Wave Cannon, and the affected player will move to one side while the rest of the group stays stacked behind the boss. Up next, the boss will cast Turfing. This will hit the main tank 5 times and then blast them with Fire 3 immediately after. Use cooldowns and heal through this as necessary. Immediately after, Southern Cross will be cast and all players will need to be stacked to bait the ice puddles again and then move out appropriately. Because of the tethered pairs, we have 1 fire and 1 ice pair dodge to the left after Southern Cross, and the other 2 pairs dodge to the right. This is in preparation for the upcoming mechanic and helps tethered pairs stay as close together as possible while coordinating movement. After another cleave, the boss will cast Broken Seal. This spawns 4 fire and 4 ice meteors in a set pattern around the room. Each tethered pair will need to stand in the matching meteor to avoid excess rate damage. The 3 possible set patterns are 2 clumps on either side of him, a ring of meteors in melee, or a ring of meteors at range. Since we have players split into 2 pairs after Southern Cross, each player grabs the appropriate meteor closer to them depending on the platform. If you're having trouble with this, be sure to communicate with your partner about how you'll be moving. Again, you never want to get too far away from your partner. Once the meteors explode, all the tethers will disappear. The Broken Seal pattern here will also determine what the boss's next attack will be, and players can use this to predict what's incoming. The cluster of meteors on either side will cause the boss to cast Biting Halberd. The outer ring of meteors causes the boss to cast Cyclical. The inner ring of meteors causes the boss to cast Tail End. Move appropriately to dodge whichever of the 3 AoE attacks he casts. At this point, players will receive new tether partners, and these mechanics will repeat once again. Remember to move Wave Cannon away from the group, heal and cool down through Turfing, and then stack for Southern Cross. Split into your groups and wait for the next Broken Seal pattern. Handle each meteor appropriately and then dodge the next AoE attack as necessary. Another cleave and then the boss will cast Soar. Similar to the second phase, the dive bomb pattern can be predicted by the initial Soar pattern. Since all players should know where to move and how to spread out, you should have no problem handling this cluster of mechanics. If you're having trouble with overlap, using Tank Limit Break here can save people from death. Stack for Demonic Dive while the single marked player stands away. Next up, the boss will cast the Demon's Claw. This targets the tank for high damage, Magic Ball Up Stack, knocks back and stuns them for 10 seconds. The outer wall will do damage through any immunity here, so tanks will need to take care not to get knocked into the wall. To avoid this, turn the boss around during the cast to be knocked back into a safe area of the arena. The boss will then cast Wave Cannon on the main tank. The raid can either share damage by stacking in front of the main tank, or simply have them hollowed ground or living dead through the blast. At this point, you've seen every mechanic he'll throw at you, and the phase will repeat. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.